disputes, the case of India, Bangladesh and Myanmar. We have a very distinguished set of panelists, but before I give the floor to them, may I just locate this particular session in the overall framework and structure of this conference, beginning with, I think, the three sort of major policy-related statements that we have, well, not only policy, technical and policy statements that we had yesterday. Admiral Budwar, giving us a kind of topography of the UNCLOS, including the places and points at which the pace of change is pushing against the legal framework adopted in 1982, and that in some ways was elaborated in the last session that we had. And the statement and policy speech made by Minister of State Honorable M.J. Akbar, where he showed our change of thinking in the way we look at the sea and the land-sea relationship as well, and the outward orientation, which propels us to seek for a kind of regime of freedom relating to the seas, space, skies, and also cyberspace. And also the third keynote address by Mr. Raja Mohan, where he gave us the relationship between law and power, but also gave us ways away from the dilemma posed, or the obstacles posed perhaps by big power relationships on other countries, and in particular stressing a cooperative framework. So we have that structure, and we have the structure of the talks this morning, of the panels this morning. The first, which was the enduring legitimacy of the UNCLOS and its continuing vitality, the present session. The next session on the problem of non-compliance with the UNCLOS, with particular reference to the South China Sea. And finally, some kind of maritime security architecture in the Indo-Pacific region to maintain freedom of navigation under UNCLOS. So in many ways, I would invite panelists as well as questions from the floor to focus their attention in some ways on how the resolution of the disputes relating to maritime boundary or the exclusive economic zone in relation to India, Bangladesh and Myanmar may have been facilitated by certain conditions, but may also hold lessons for the resolution of other disputes, and how, if those conditions don't exist, they might be invited or induced to create those conditions in which perhaps such a peaceful resolution of disputes is possible. So let me start with our first speaker of the morning, the very distinguished Ambassador Tariq Karim. Ambassador Tariq Karim has already been introduced, a former ambassador of Bangladesh to India, as well as a member of Vivekananda Foundation and a representative of the World Bank.
For your introduction. First of all, I would be remiss if I didn't thank the organizers, the India Foundation, Alok Bansal and Ram Madhavji for inviting me for first holding this important event and what import it could have in addressing other festering issues that still plague this part of the world, and for inviting me to share some of my thoughts, particularly on how Bangladesh and India resolved a 40-year dispute gracefully and in good spirit. Does it have lessons for us? I will share Bangladesh's perspective. I will not go into the nitty-gritty of the legal arguments presented and in, how we went about arguing our case. I'm not a lawyer. I'm basically a diplomat. I understand politics of what drives a lot of other things. And I think one thing which we all tend to forget is, particularly in this part of the world, the politics drives everything. Everything can be politicized and it can be turned against you, one party or the other. I've been involved with this. I had the good fortune and privilege since the early 70s, just after the inception of Bangladesh, when I would sit in as note taker, a very humble, lowly functionary, taking notes of senior officers being chaired by the Foreign Secretary, where we would be discussing a lot of issues in the newly founded state. And I learned something about the mind of the senior policymakers and the topmost, the Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the founder of Bangladesh, of how he approached different issues that were confronting the new state, and beginning with the new state inherited the consequences of the commissioning of the Farrakka Barrage. And that shaped the mindset immediately, that this is something, this is a fait accompli. Now how is it going to affect our water future, our agricultural security, and our food security? And incidentally, something happened just before the creation of Bangladesh. That was the 1970 cyclone, which had a tectonic influence on the elections which took place in 1970, which then led off to the chain of events, ultimately resulting in the birth of Bangladesh. And that was that Bhola cyclone, which claimed perhaps 1 million or 2 million lives, resulted in the creation of an island or a shoal area known as Newmore Island, to which India laid claim. And immediately that triggered off a response also in Bangladesh. It heightened what I call the psychological frame of mind of the new leadership. Of course, Bangladesh at that time was down on its knees, poor, without resources. So there were hopes and anticipations of finding oil and gas fueled by geological reports. And incidentally, I was closely involved with a German expert who came to Bangladesh and then said, you have definitely oil and gas both onshore and offshore. And it's a question of your having the resources to go out and seek them. So there was great conviction in the minds of the new leadership, in the minds of the people that was generated, it was widely publicized, that there was great wealth lying on the ocean beds waiting to be tapped. So Bangladesh, as a result, this is the frame of mind with which Bangladesh approached the UNCLOS, because it needed the backing of a network of laws or a legal system which would substantiate its claim. And I think it's important to understand, before we go into the legalities of it, what drove Bangladesh into the process. There was great angst, as I've described. There were passionate debates to which I was privy to. And an element that was mentioned early on was what basis do we take to frame our argument, our case? And one was the Swatch of No Ground, referred to a song, whether we could use the geomorphological arguments on which to rest our case. Ultimately, in the end, the tribunal, the ICLOS, rejected that because of the logic that the silt bringing down would keep shifting. It would be not a permanent marker, and happen as it happens in our rivers, where shoals are formed, then they disappear and form somewhere else. This is a map of the Swatch of No Ground. I don't know whether you can see it clearly. You're not connected. I don't know why. Okay, there you are. And you see that Swatch of No Ground coming down. It's essentially a canyon, a trough-shaped canyon, a marine canyon that crosses the continental shelf diagonally, situated in the south of the Ganges-Brahmaputra Delta. There are similar troughs. This is known as the Ganga trough. There is the Indus trough off the mouth of the Indus, and there is a Mississippi trough off the mouth of the Mississippi. So this is not a peculiar, this is a phenomenon not peculiar to any one river. It could happen in others. This area, and I have been on this on a scientific boat for 5 days, that was quite an experience, is a treasure trove of marine life. And again, that was another factor which influenced Bangladesh, that we need to preserve our marine life. So I'm mentioning these different factors which go into configuring your mindset, and then how politics uses the different factors for or against making a case. These are whales. They are alive and well and doing well over there. The other was the Newmore or South Talpatti Island. Both India and Bangladesh laid claim. Incidentally, it's 3.5 kilometers, and by 3 kilometers, there's no permanent structure, no habitation. But India sent some paramilitary soldiers and navy to it in 1981 to hoist its national flag, and that created a huge furor that the Indian Navy is encroaching into Bangladesh's territorial waters, and this is a precursor to showing how India is the dominating power. And 1981, incidentally, is when the first military-backed government or military government consolidated its hold in Bangladesh. So the politics comes straight from there. Mujib had been assassinated, the Awami League driven into the wilderness, and the counter-narrative was now beginning to take hold. And that is where Newmore Island is. Of course, what was given out is that, okay, if India gets possession of that, the baseline will be configured in a certain way, and we will lose everything. And you keep building on that ad nauseum until you've whipped up public hysteria. Well, Newmore Island was taken care of by nature. It just disappeared in 2040 as testified by University of Jadavpur findings. And that's not the only island. 2 other islands disappeared and 10 more are in danger. That is the reality of rising ocean. The politics. Bangladesh remains still a deeply divided political nation. And the divisions somehow also trigger mirroring reactions within India. Had Sheikh Mujibur Rahman not been assassinated in 1975, followed by the complete relegation to political exile of his party, which led Bangladesh to freedom, then, and had military rule not established itself, I think these disputes would have been resolved. That's my personal conviction. However, that didn't happen. 18 years, or more than 18 years, these disputes were deliberately stoked by military or quasi-military regimes. When Sheikh Hasina returned in 1996, she did set out, she wanted to resolve the issues with India because her goal was domestic development. And within the first 2 years of coming back to power, she addressed the Ganges, she signed the Ganges Treaty, the water sharing treaty with India, and in 1997, the insurgency in the hill tracts was ended. Then the next window, it was a weak coalition, as was indeed the coalition in India. Both warmed to each other, but not politically very strong. The window closed in a year and a half, and they went into what I would call circling the wagon mode for the remaining term. But the next window opened in 2008, December, when Sheikh Hasina was swept into power with a landslide victory, and she had a mandate to address all the pending issues with India. And so a dramatic turnaround came, and that started with a visit in 2010, when Bangladesh actually worked with India in trying to address all the issues. I call it reconfiguring Bangladesh-India relations. A number of developments took place, the most important of which being addressing border issues which had been festering left over from the partition. And both countries decided to move forward. Bangladesh also took a critically important decision in 2009. It decided to take the maritime boundary issues with Myanmar and India to the ITLOS. It took the issue to relating to India in October and with Myanmar actually later. But ironically, the ITLOS gave its award on Myanmar earlier, 2 years earlier in 2012. It took 2 more years before the award was given on the Bangladesh-India dispute. Now, the political bonhomie that was perhaps the most important factor that decided the course of events. Both leaders at the highest level agreed to take the case to ITLOS. I think that is the number one point. It could have been taken earlier. It could have been taken for the wrong reasons. They decided to take it there in order to resolve it. There was a debate, why don't we resolve it bilaterally through negotiations? Because that is the path we took to resolving the land boundary issue. There was a difference. In the land boundary case, in 1974, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and Prime Minister Indira Gandhi had signed already the broad parameters of the land boundary agreement. What remained was to work out the protocol, actually demarcating all the different areas and putting and executing or operationalizing what they had decided on. That remained in affairs between 74 until final signing of the protocol in 2011 and ratification by India in 2015. Bangladesh ratified the agreements immediately, but it took India and the confederal structure of India. It dragged on for some time and then it was ratified. It was ratified commendably under Prime Minister Modi's stewardship. Why did Bangladesh choose this? I can share this having been part of the team that finalized the Ganges Agreement in 1996. Whatever agreement, given the contentious political nature domestically as well as bilaterally, whatever agreement is arrived at through a political discourse, you are damned if you do and you are damned if you don't. One party or the other will always accuse you of having sold out. And I think the land boundary case was different. There was an agreement, it was in 74. The broad parameters had been laid out. In the case of the maritime, the parameters did not exist. Both saw north and south. They were diametrically opposed in terms. And so both governments would have faced the risk of facing the wrath of some element or some section of the polity or the other with whatever they agreed on. So the best was to relegate it to the UNCLOS process to which both were signatories and allow the ITLOS to arbitrate. So whatever the result, they could say, we believe in international law, we are bodies of the, we believe in the UN system, we are parties to UNCLOS, they have decided it, I'm not to blame for the decision. There was a convergence on modalities. Importantly, both agreed that the Radcliffe Award of 1974, read in conjunction with the notification of the Governor of Bengal in 1925, the acceptable starting points. Without this, you couldn't have proceeded forward. Particularly the second point I mentioned, maps were mentioned dating back to 25, but nobody had the maps. The Bangladesh side actually did laborious research, went digging for maps everywhere, and finally in the India office records they were able to get the maps and documents which they presented, and graciously the Indians accepted this. Now if India had refused to accept it, then it would have again created a problem. So it's the mindset with which we are approaching problem solving, I think that is more important than anything else. And that is the political will. There was a very clear demonstration of the political will by both the sides. The final award, it's there. It did create some problems, and I'm sure this will roll some gray areas because drawing the lines from Myanmar, from the Myanmar's demarcation, delimitation, and Bangladesh delimitation, certain areas were left, and you see this here. The areas in green and yellow, those are areas which are grey. What the court did was, it told Bangladesh, you have the right to explore on the surface, you don't have the right to the waters above it. So it requires the goodwill of both to be able to, or all three to be able to address that. Was that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. If politics goes out of control, it could be a bad thing. However, it defined everything else very clearly. So at least it opened up the gates for all the parties to now embark on activities which they could not for the last 40 years. Implications. Incidentally, although Bangladesh's case on Song was rejected, India's claim on no more islands was accepted, and India received nearly 6,000 square kilometers of the contested zone where the island had once existed. It enables both to cooperate in a number of things. Tribunal encouraged India and Bangladesh to determine the measures they consider appropriate. Now this is important. In a sense, it is the tribunal's decisions are binding, but they're also telling, hey, you two have to work together to make this actually succeed. Just don't leave it to us. So you've come this far, now continue. Both were patted in the back and said, continue working, and you will go elsewhere. There have been legal opinions saying it should have gone more, it should have defined this and that. That will remain. But as happens with constitution making and laws under the constitution in the domestic domain, the constitution is a broad statement of what the goals of the state are. Then under that, I'm finishing in 30 seconds, under that laws are constituted and then judgments passed which build up as precedents adding to the code of law. I think the importance of this decision is that it is making the UNCLOS a workable pathway. It is adding to the body of law that will emerge, and the body of law will constantly be work in progress. And I'll end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Tariq. Do be careful of that statement. And thank you also for bringing out the relationship between politics and the resolution of a dispute, in this case in a very favorable manner, in spite of the complexities of relations between neighboring states like India and Myanmar, and also Myanmar and Bangladesh, which you touched on tangentially. And I think there was also one very important point that was made about the resolution. In particular, the kind of resolution of the principles of equity and equidistance, and a creative solution by introducing this concept of grey areas, which has subsequently been extended in subsequent readings of the PCA, including that relating to the India, the India-Bangladesh boundary. So here we see some creative, interpretations. We also see its possible applicability to the next session in terms of non-compliance of the law of sea in the South China Sea, and possibly even when we take up the kernel or that element of cooperation that is required to build upon this adjudication onto the whole notion of a maritime architecture for the Indo-Pacific. And even before we get to the Indo-Pacific, perhaps to the Bay of Bengal itself. Our next speaker, and I think our next speaker is a lawyer highly qualified to enlighten us on on the more intricate issues raised by the two rulings. Welcome, Mr. Anirudh Rajput.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by thanking India Foundation for extending this very generous invitation for me to be here and have the opportunity of speaking to experts and practitioners in different areas of UNCLOS. Disputes are an inseparable and inevitable part of human existence. So in the existence of states, disputes are bound to exist. What matters is, how are those disputes resolved? Prior to resolving those disputes, the issue is of managing those disputes. And a great deal of success comes when states try to speak to each other and try to resolve those disputes in an amicable manner, where they discuss it and try to find a common solution which is generally accepted. But often it is not possible to manage a dispute. And when it is not possible to manage a dispute, it becomes necessary to resolve a dispute. And one of the fundamental achievements of the Charter of the United Nations and the world that we have seen after 1945, that is after creation of the United Nations, is creation of a world where states are willing to resolve their disputes in a peaceful manner without fighting with each other. There has been a lot of debate about the relationship between power and law, or power and rules. Often while criticizing international law, we tend to forget how much it has achieved rather than what it is yet to achieve. If we did not have UNCLOS, and we have had these maritime delimitation disputes, imagine what the world would have been. So should we be grateful to UNCLOS for what it has done to us, or should we be picking holes in it? Of course, we should criticize it on its merits, but we should not try to use a political lens to undermine what the UNCLOS has achieved, despite how powerful or how weak that particular state concern is involved. With that in mind, I think the Bay of Bengal disputes, this is not the phrase which has been used either by UNCLOS or by the Annex 7 Tribunal, which decided either of the disputes, but I think that's a good way of describing it. That's how this panel is structured. This panel is structured around the concept of Bay of Bengal disputes, because there is a set of two disputes. The first dispute is of course between Bangladesh and Myanmar, and the second one is between Bangladesh and India. The dispute between Bangladesh and Myanmar went to the ICLOS, the International Tribunal for Law of the Sea, whereas the dispute between India and Bangladesh was adjudicated under what is called the Annex 7 Tribunal of UNCLOS. It did go to the PCA, but there are no PCA arbitrations because PCA is simply an institution which administers arbitrations. The arbitration as such is an Annex 7 arbitration. And this point did come up in the discussions in the earlier section, that there are three ways in which disputes could be resolved by states. The first way is that both the disputing parties, or more than two of the disputing parties, can go to the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea if they have so agreed to. If they have not so agreed to, they can even go to the International Court of Justice if they have so agreed to again. But if they have not agreed to anything, then they cannot step out of it. They have to go mandatorily for a dispute resolution procedure. And that dispute resolution procedure flows from Annex 7 Tribunal. And therefore, while concluding the negotiations of UNCLOS in 1982, the president of the negotiation, Ambassador Tommy Koh from Singapore, he said, UNCLOS is a package deal. It's a package deal because you can't pick and choose. When you are choosing UNCLOS, you have to choose it entirely, which means you have to choose the entire dispute resolution mechanism contemplated under UNCLOS. You can make reservations, but your reservations are bound to be within the framework of UNCLOS. Therefore, the issues in relation to interpretation and application of the convention, that is UNCLOS, have to be resolved peacefully without resort to force by any of the parties. Now, with this background, let me just quickly touch upon the legal principles which were common in both the disputes, in what I tried to describe as the Bay of Bengal disputes. The first area of conflict between all the parties was identification of a maritime boundary which would delineate, which would delimit, the maritime delimitation of conflicting territorial claims. So the first zone of conflict, or first zone of overlapping claim, was the territorial sea. As we all know, territorial sea is a region of 12 nautical miles which starts from the boundary. But even beyond that, up to 200 nautical miles, is the exclusive economic zone as well as the continental shelf. Although it's the same area, the nature of rights in the EEZ and the nature of rights in the continental shelf is distinct. One is about the super adjacent waters and the other is about the sea. The second overlapping claims, the second set of overlapping claims in the Bay of Bengal disputes were about the EEZ and the continental shelf, which is an area which extended up to the length, or rather the breadth, of 200 nautical miles from the baseline. The third set of overlapping claims was what is called the extended continental shelf. The extended continental shelf is an innovative creation of Article 76 of UNCLOS. It is a highly technical area of making an extended continental shelf. I remember spending at least 6 hours breaking my heads explaining to my students what really is an extended continental shelf and how do you come across and identify what is called force points or foots of slope, and then what is maximum change of gradient and 1% sedimentary rock. I don't intend to get into all of that. It's just to give you a feeling that law is just not about policy. International relations is just not about policy. It is also about technical rules, and it's playing fair in the game. And whoever plays fair has the most to achieve from the region. So this was the third set of dispute, or third set of overlapping claims, which these three states had over the extended continental shelf. Now let us understand what is the legal background of these three zones, because the laws on overlapping claims in these zones are different and they differ quite substantially. There are very subtle nuances and distinctions between these principles. The first is the territorial sea. The territorial sea is governed by Article 15 of UNCLOS, and it has four fundamental underlying ideas which are reflected in Article 15 of UNCLOS. First, maritime delimitation always happens between adjacent or opposing coasts, because there is a distinction between delimitation and demarcation or delineation. If a state is making a unilateral claim in one direction without any dispute with anybody, it's simply an exercise of delineation or demarcation. Therefore, the dispute between India and Bangladesh on its land territory was resolved already. The only thing that had to be done was to demarcate it, is basically laying down the physical lines on the ground and implementing it. So delineation is a far more uncontroversial and a simpler exercise. It does create a problem in the context of the law of the sea, because if you make extended claims and go far too much into the sea, then you are eating into what is called the common heritage of mankind. So you have to be reasonable there as well. But the principle of Article 15 is you have to have opposing or adjacent coasts who have overlapping claims over the territorial sea. The second requirement is there has to be no agreement. UNCLOS is ready to accept a situation where states are ready to sit with each other and manage their disputes. But if they are unable to manage a dispute, that is, they don't have an agreement between them, then the third requirement or the third principle of Article 15 that deals with territorial delimitation chips in, which is you have to draw a median line. A median line is a line which is at an equitable distance from the base points of both the coasts. This might be slightly technical, but in simple words, it means that the distance, every point on the line, which is an equidistant line, has to be at equal distance from both the coasts. It's as simple as that. Although it might sound as simple as that, often when you are trying to implement it on ground because of geographical features, it is not possible to have that what is called the equidistance line. And therefore, in case of two exceptions, which is the fourth condition laid down under Article 15, is if there is a historical title or special circumstances, then the equidistance line could be altered. In both the disputes, in Bay of Bengal disputes, there were no historic title, but the dispute really was about special circumstances. And the special circumstances sprang for various legal articles. Bangladesh was trying to say that its coast is highly unstable, the geological situation, geomorphological situation has changed, there is climate change, rising sea levels, so these are all special circumstances. In Bangladesh, Myanmar was trying to rely upon certain islands and saying that because there are islands, so equitable line is not an appropriate solution. So the crux of territorial delimitation is an equidistance line. It is not looking at an equitable solution. But the equitable solution requirement really flows from Article 74 and 83 of Articles. 74 deals with exclusive economic zone and 83 deals with the continental shelf. Both provisions are exact replication of each other because the fundamental principles of segregating overlapping claims over these areas are the same and remain common. It again underlines the requirement of agreement. If both the overlapping parties are in agreement, then that's how they would delimit their conflicting areas. But if they fail to have an agreement, then they have to have an equitable solution. The difference between an equidistance line and an equitable solution is because territorial claims are the areas where the sovereign rights are far more dense, far more intense as compared to the EEZ and the continental shelf, where rights are limited only to exploitation. And therefore the objective is what you can draw out from the resources. What is the equitable solution, what is the equitable benefit that you can gain is the real test for delimiting of these two overlapping claims. When in the Bay of Bengal, all these three states had claims on all these three areas. So they had to travel through these complex arguments, complex legal arguments of equidistance line in the territorial zone and the requirements of equitable solution in the continental shelf, in the EEZ, as well as in the extended continental shelf, which is beyond 200 nautical miles. In a sense, the dispute between India and Bangladesh had a certain amount of legacy, and it also had a colonial legacy. Because the underlying controversy, could you put up the map or I have to organize? Yes, the first map please. It's very difficult to describe maritime claims without a map. Yes. Could you expand it a bit if possible, or that's the zoom out? That's the maximum? I'm terribly sorry for this. Let me try to explain as much as I can based on this map. So, as you can see, the Indian coast is laid down onto the left. Immediately following is Bangladesh, and thereafter is Myanmar. The line, the red line to extreme right, is the line which was drawn by ITLOS, which was delimiting Bangladesh and Myanmar. And that goes on further down. The dark blue region that you can see right in the center, that is the extended continental shelf, that is the area beyond 200 nautical miles. But the light blue area, which is surrounding the landmass and the extended continental shelf, is the 200 nautical mile overlapping area. And that is the area which is the EEZ as well as the continental shelf, which of course encompasses the territorial sea. Immediately next to the red line is a black line, and that black line is what India's claim was, which was rejected. The next to that line is the Bangladesh line, which was eventually admitted by the Annex 7 tribunal and which is now the line that delimits. The reason why I wanted to show this map is that area in between the black line and red line is the overlapping area. And that's the area regarding where the fight was about, where India lost despite being politically strong, militarily strong, but when it came to a legal arguments of Bangladesh were much stronger than the Indian legal arguments, and they were based on facts, and which India had to lose out, and which India very gracefully and rightfully so gave up its claims. The first point of controversy was where to begin to draw the line from. You can see all those lines converging at the top, at the land. And that was precisely the controversy, because that is the first point of what is the land boundary terminus. That is where does the land boundary finish and where does the watermark begin? And which is that point where the territorial claims of both the states end. And there was a huge controversy about where that line was. The reason being, it arose from interpretation of the Radcliffe Award and then after the BAC Commission. So there were two awards and they both had to be interpreted, and depending on the outcome of the interpretation, that land boundary terminus had to be determined. India's argument was that the land boundary terminus is a flexible line. It was basically doing a textual interpretation of Radcliffe Award and saying the award says at the time of drawing the at the present time, and at the present time means at present time when the dispute is being resolved. But Bangladesh was saying at the present time doesn't mean now, but it means when Radcliffe Award was delivered. And whether at present time means the time when the Radcliffe Award was delivered or not, that depended on BAC Commission, because the BAC Commission had gone into the great details, went into the map of 1925, which Ambassador referred to me before me. And based on that, they found out, after looking at all the maps, that Bangladesh's claim is substantiated. And there is support in Bangladesh's claim, and they agreed to put the land boundary terminus where Bangladesh wished to. What India wished to, which Ambassador Karim had shown before, was a line which was much further, which was going much towards Bangladesh. The natural consequence would have been India would have got a much larger share of the territorial sea, continental shelf, and the EEZ. So despite issues which had a colonial legacy, and especially the Radcliffe Award, which has a great deal of sensitivity in India, despite these sensitive issues, this was a time when both states got together and resolved it. In fact, the Bangladesh-Myanmar dispute is far less controversial, and it's extremely impressive the way with which both these states tried to maneuver over this dispute. And the interesting part is that Bangladesh made a concession before it lost. It said that because there were these particular islands which were being claimed by Bangladesh, the maritime entitlement claims were accepted by ICLOS. But Bangladesh said, if you accept this line, we are cutting off access of Myanmar to their continental shelf and EEZ. But we are ready to make a submission to ICLOS, make a commitment to ICLOS that we would not stop the access of Myanmar to these regions. So that is a concession. Despite having territorial claims, there is a right in perpetuity, a perpetual right to use those regions and then to get into the continental shelf and the extended continental shelf. I see that I have very little time and I'll just conclude in the next minute, but I'll quickly make some observations. There are much further issues about how to draw the equidistance line. Interestingly, Bangladesh was trying to argue that let's use the angle bisector method. I won't get into the details, but the benefit of an angle bisector method is you get a far more region than an equidistance line. But in Bangladesh, Myanmar, Bangladesh was arguing we would like to have an equidistance line. And when the India-Bangladesh arbitration went on, Indian lawyers smartly pulled out the Bangladesh argument in Bangladesh, Myanmar, and the tribunal and the Annex 7 tribunal said that before ICLOS, if you've insisted on equidistance line, you better stick to the equidistance line. And then based on the islands which certainly disappeared, eventually it was found out that it's appropriate to draw this line as an equidistance line, a line which goes through the center and divides both the region into equal parts with minor alterations, and the alterations are certainly minor. So what do we take away from this entire dispute? I think Ambassador Karim made a very important point, that those issues which are politically sensitive are best left to lawyers. Because it is not a choice between law or power. The domain of law is distinct from the domain of power. Because the domain of law is a rule-based system. The domain of power is a discretion-based system. The more we are in discretion, more possibility of a stronger power misusing its position. The more we are in the realm of law, more possibility of we adhering to certain systems. Both can't work in seclusion, but both need to coexist. And I think Bangladesh maritime disputes exhibit the spirit of coexistence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rajput, for a very, very clear enunciation of both the law, as well as the principles, as well as the way they were applied, and also a nice pitch for the legal profession. But I think they also fulfilled, and I'm liberal with the time, the first two speakers, because they've also fulfilled, I think, a requirement that Ram Madhavji made on the first day, that this conference should also fulfill a kind of public education function. And I think we are all learning a lot about details of these two particular areas. Our next speaker is Mr. Myung Hai Tan Heng from the Democratic Governance. I invite you to make your presentation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Myung Hai Tan Heng from Myanmar, and I would like to say thank you very much for India Foundation for inviting me here and giving me the opportunity to represent Myanmar and Myanmar perspective. And good morning to you all the distinguished guests and all the participants and Mr. Chairman. This is something, UNCLOS is quite new to Myanmar people as well. This is something very important issue, but a lot of the people, I reckon, around the world not aware of it. And thank you very much to the India Foundation for raising that issue on the spotlight, on that right time and right moment and at the right place, Adman Island, which is very distinguished and very significant place. Without the permission, prior permission, we cannot be here. And thank you very much for that. Yes, our issue is to look at the perspective of Myanmar on what has happened. Dispute between Myanmar and Bangladesh to claim on the maritime boundary, as well as to look at the India and the Bangladesh. I don't want to go into details for the India and the Bangladesh because I'm not the lawyer either. I'm like political advocates. Now I focus mainly on the good governance, and I will talk about more on the politics as well, especially political leadership. This is very important that when we wanted to resolve the issue, the leadership of the country, they need to be pragmatic, and they need to have the really set, determined policy to resolve the issue peacefully. When we look at the Myanmar issue, Myanmar is always got the foreign policy of peaceful coexistence, which pioneered together with India and China. We do have the foreign policy, fight peaceful coexistence between the neighboring countries. Regarding to that, Bangladesh is also our neighboring country. Well, we share the border. Sometimes we laugh and hate each other, sometimes it can occur. We are the friends, we are the neighbors, it can happen because we share the border. Not only land border, but also the maritime border. So this is natural that sort of the disputes occurred. And especially, as rightly mentioned in the invitation as well, land resources we have explored and almost exhausted. And we are now looking at the natural resources in the oceans and to explore and exploit, to use for the better benefit for the people of our respective nations. Especially in this era, we are very much interested in exploiting oil and gas, and also to look after the maritime biologies and to safeguard the maritime security as well. So my previous colleague, friends, he mentioned a lot. Technically, because he's the lawyer, and we are very blessed to be enlightened by him as well. So we got enlightened. So I don't want to go in detail about that technical measures. I would like to take from the result, the outcome, the dispute between India and Myanmar, sorry, I got your balance. Bangladesh and Myanmar, and India and Bangladesh. To move on, the conclusion, what can be done for the future. So they are the historic problems. But we try to, our respected nations try to resolve it on the low level, but we never reach the agreement. So as my previous speaker rightfully said, the Mr. Ambassador from Bangladesh also rightfully said, if we cannot resolve the political issue peacefully, then the best thing is leave that to the lawyers, because they are the professionals. They know better than us, especially for the oceans and the sea. For us, for me, even I come from Yangon, which is the coastal town, but for me, ocean and sea, quite far from my imagination, my seeing. So when it comes to the technical methods to resolve it, to be honest, we got limited information or knowledge how to resolve it. But when we look at resolving the issue between the Myanmar and the Bangladesh, I would like to say we should be very grateful that we do have the very, for both countries, very pragmatic and practical leaderships who got the political ways of resolving issue peacefully. This is very important. Now, if we don't resolve it peacefully, what is the alternative? And we should be very grateful that UNCLOS is there. In this century, in this era, going to war is not practical. And we should be also very grateful that the political leadership and also the mechanism existed there, and we are the parties, we try to resolve it peacefully. So, because of the UNCLOS and the tribunal result, we can avoid the potential war broke out between us. It is not realistic, but sometimes you got the recurrent. Oh, if we cannot resolve it, less time for our motherland. It could happen, but thanks to our leadership from both country, we try to resolve it peacefully, and we respect the outcome of the court as well. So the outcome, we got the clear line, defined and drawn the boundary between the disputed nations. India versus Bangladesh, or Myanmar versus Bangladesh. So which opened the opportunity for countries to do the business in our respective sea territory, so that we got the right and respect to honor these results. And also we also got the right to explore our region, our territory, any natural resources to safeguard the nation. And also pave the way to cooperate, working together to control and safeguard marine biology and marine sustainability. And also, above all, which created the opportunity to do the countries constitute regular coordinated naval patrols along the common boundary, because we got the clear line respected by both nations, which opened up the opportunity previously, because it is a disputed area, to explore the oil and gas. The international community, companies, they don't want to do that. They are not willing to invest money on that disputed area. Now we got our respective rights and our area, so we can do our own business and enjoy the benefits of our areas as well. And also we can also safeguard and check the illegal fishing, illegal migration, human trafficking, drug trafficking, smuggling, and also terrorism and other transnational crimes. Because of the outcome, we respect it, coming from the tribunal. And also, another very important point is, like, set the example for the other nations who lock in the dispute to find a peaceful resolution through the UNCLOS. So for instance, like, what can we do? How can we imply the findings and also delivery of the court and UNCLOS in South China Sea disputes? What can we do? How can we promote the UNCLOS? And also, again, I would like to give the credit to the pragmatic leadership, to the respected countries, government of India, Myanmar, and the Bangladesh for choosing the peaceful resolution and putting confidence on the UNCLOS. But there is a setback. It is the last point as well. If the powerful nation choose not to go to the UNCLOS, what shall we do? If a powerful nation like United States or the China choose not to go to the UNCLOS, what shall we do? What are the other alternatives and how shall we promote working together to promote for the UNCLOS and to distribute the knowledge among our country and to enjoy living happily together peacefully in our world? Thank you very much.
Thank you to Myo Tan Peng for your intervention. It's now 12 o'clock. Thank you also for being brief and giving us a little more time both for Professor Sriradha as well as for questions. I invite you, Sriradha, for your intervention.
Thank you, Chair. Very grateful to Mataji for this invitation, especially also for the entire India family, foundation family. The youngsters really make it very seamless. The travel, the hospitality, the entire stay. Thank you very much for that. We've heard some very technical presentations. We've also heard Ambassador Karim and we all talk about the subject. What I'm trying to do is not repeated, but let me just go back a little bit and try and understand what the context in Bay of Bengal is, and also what we are discussing the larger context, whether that's applicable to the larger seas. We must try not to forget the fact that India and Myanmar, or Bangladesh and Myanmar, restarted the bilateral talks on the boundary after 22 years. So it's not as if there were always lots of bonhomie and there was problems. We've seen both belligerents from both Myanmar and Bangladesh on the littoral waters. We've also seen how a third party could mediate there. Between India and Bangladesh, on the other hand, again, after a gap of 28 years, they came back to the discussion table. We've heard that there was, lots of argument on both sides. Over the years, several times I've actually met with the Indian hydrologist who was actually then discussing the matters legally with our Bangladesh and the entire team. And what I've understood here is that often what we perceive as the right principle that we are applying was not necessarily correct in the larger context of UNCLOS. The Indian team, in several of our bilateral dialogues that I've been part of over the last 20 years, we've heard both point of view. And if you listen to the Bangladeshi, you'll be totally convinced of the argument because of the kind of principles that they've applied. Similarly for the Indian team. Of course, we've also seen how, and I think we've seen how ICLOS and PC actually gave the different arbitration and how all the parties concerned very gracefully accepted it. But let's stop here and think as to why is it that we actually could even go there after the fact that there was issues, there were bilateral dispute over it. The main framework which is applicable in BIMSTEC or the Bay of Bengal area is, the Bay of Bengal area, not BIMSTEC here, is that the stakes were really low. We are discussing something like 25,000 square kilometers, which in maritime sense is really a very small number. We've also seen how in both the cases, certain almost 4/5 was awarded again to the other party and 3/4 to the other party. But invariably the stakes I'm saying is low, which is also a reason why they were able to proceed to that process. Some of the other problems that we face in the real world that we live in here, the stakes are far higher. Also, we've seen, and this really happened both the times, when the parties went to for arbitration for legal assessment was when they saw, and the main trigger actually was the South Korean company Daewoo, who was trying to do the exploration, and the other party of course said no, you can't, because that's my water, and that's how the entire argument is. So the uncertainty of not being able to actually exploit your own natural resources were greater compared to the fact that we thought a neutral arbiter would do a better position in actually ensuring a common space for all. So the faith here on a neutral arbiter was very, very strong. Also because we realized, and both, I think all the states here, Bangladesh, Myanmar and India, that the uncertainties certainly were far more inherently in the problem. So we rather go with it, and I think again the point that has been well made constantly, that everybody agreed to go with the view of what was accorded. But at the same time, we ought to remember here that and I think the keynote yesterday made this very presence, and I think that's been constantly been recurrent theme today also, that politics played a very large role. I'll go back to the point that, of course, my previous speakers made about India-Bangladesh. We've seen that India had clear demarcation lines with all the other states of Bengal. This was also the time that the BIMSTEC was also came into being. And though we know that BIMSTEC for the last 20 years has been very, very dominant, it's only now that there's a certain fillip to it. India's very actively pursuing it, and we hope that it's going to be. So this was one particular consideration for that time for India in 2008, that we really need to clear out the bold here in BIMSTEC, because without that we won't be able to proceed. And I think the awakening had already reached South Asia, especially India. There's several issues on which regionalism has to have a larger underplay. For years we've seen how India and several of the South Asian countries prefer to do things bilaterally. I think the mood and the environment was changing. It was making it imperative for you to actually look at different solutions. I think that evolving atmosphere was very important into how you could actually come to the similarly for Bangladesh and Myanmar. As it was pointed out, my immediate speaker or previous speaker was that there was never really any bad blood. It's a one particular outstanding issue which remains contentious till date. But again, in terms of searching for exploration of hydrocarbons and other resources, I think the inherent point here was that all the parties concerned agreed that seeking a legal solution was actually beneficial for all. Now, can that apply to other problems that we face in today's world? I'm not sure it does. In this context, yes, it did. Because I think everybody was convinced about the fact that the larger, even if I'm going to lose out, in which India did lose out in about 20 plus square kilometers, 1,000 square kilometers in the arbitration, I didn't question it at all, went ahead, agreed. But certainly there was the point here that in the larger context, it was beneficial. Now, whether this can also apply to the other things that we see in today's and the several other issues that came up yesterday, I'm not sure that does. I'm going to now see how we are going to take this forward. We, of course, again, previous speakers have talked about the fact that how the resolution of this context gave it an enabling atmosphere for a blue economy. Again, in the typical slow style that this region has, we haven't moved ahead on it. I mean, there's a blueprint ready. Several of the communiques that we've signed, all the parties here have signed with each other bilaterally and otherwise. And of course, also on the BIMSTEC declaration, that has a very strong component, but something, as I said, 20 years and we still haven't moved on. But while, and again, I go back to what the key speaker mentioned yesterday, that cooperative engagement is the way forward. Of course, I don't think any of us in this room can disagree. But in the short term, and I mean 10 years, in the world that we live in the uneven world that we live in, is that a solution? Another factor that I think worked very well in terms of the country seeking neutral arbiter was that the countries were evenly poised. Again, the play of power here, it's not that it was absent. Let's not kid ourselves in believing that we didn't try our vigilance. Each one tried in their own way. But more there was an evenness in it, and we realized beyond a point that it was not worth the effort. Let's go. Which is not the case of the other things that we're doing. And I think that next session on non-compliance is actually far more relevant to the real world that we live in here. So I'm not really sure that the takeaways from the Bay of Bengal story is applicable, because the stakes are far, far larger there. The stakes are inherently much smaller here. Inherently, there's a sense of all the states concerned in the BIMSTEC area, in the Bay of Bengal, and of course the cooperative management, that we have to work together to do a lot of things that we bilaterally cannot do ourselves. That's true for India, that's true for Bangladesh, that's true for Myanmar. But when we are discussing the larger players in the world, and that's, I think, another core reason as to why we are here, I'm not sure that actually is something which will stick with that. Let me take this point about between Bangladesh and Myanmar. When there was this show of belligerence, when each one got their navies out, there was a bit of face-to-face for a couple of days. I was in fact present in Dhaka, and I remember the Chinese ambassador to Bangladesh actually made a public statement as to how both the states need to retrace their ways, which doesn't usually happen. In any of this, in fact, in this particular instance, and I say this with a certain sense of responsibility when I speak about this. Also, if you recall the ICLOS reading, the ICLOS award, the Chinese arbiter on that particular panel, Justice Gao, if I'm not mistaken, actually dissented and said that what they were, how they were looking at the equitable solution is actually against the equidistance, and they were looking at St. Martin's Island as the midway between the two, and that really was the mid path that they did, and they did not go into the equidistance formula, was something that they protested about. And again, here we've seen, and we constantly say this here, that the fact that India was able to reconcile its difference with Bangladesh, and similarly for Bangladesh and Myanmar, it's also because we have a larger stake in play. And I think that's important, as I'm saying, that beneficialness of the whole, the framework was important. I'm going to close in by a few comments by saying that how do I see this in the larger context? As I said today, Bay of Bengal, we see a collaborative management agreement. At the same time, we've also seen, and there is this new vision which I constantly talk about, this new security architecture that's developing, where I think Prime Minister Modi is certainly seeing South Asia being carried into Southeast Asia. The gateway to that, of course, is Bay of Bengal. Under a framework like that, there is no way that India would want to take any a step which is against that. So the whole cooperative management is in play. But what happens when some particular larger player, who, as I said, has uneven power here, and whose stakes are far greater, can we say the same reasons or factors are going to play? I really very much doubt that. But I think, by and large, everybody in the civilized world agrees that we must go ahead with cooperative management in space here. But the point is, in real world, it doesn't happen. And despite what we've heard about what UNCLOS has done, I think the point that Ramadevji had made during the Q&A, that how binding is it? We've seen in the past few years that it is anything but binding, especially on players who are very clear that they do not want to be part of this interplay, but they have the wherewithal, and I think that's extremely important in today's world, that despite how civilized and the subterfuge we all have, we still live in a world where might is right. It's been made very clear, especially in the ceilings of communications are concerned, there's a certain space that they're able to grab, and there are lots of grey areas. In fact, of course, there's reference to the grey areas in the ICLOS as well as the PAC, which has also led to the states given the fact that you need to work with each other. I think that's a point well made. But is that applicable in the actual real world, where we still see that bigger sharks are here to outdo the smaller sharks? I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sridhara, for bringing out some of the pragmatic considerations why states did agree to arbitrate. and also the essential requirement for agreement for the ruling to be respected and thereafter honored, and perhaps a pointer to the limitations in the case of the South China Sea, but also for somewhat bringing in the regional dimension, apart from the domestic political considerations and bilateral considerations, the regional dimension driving some solutions. Maybe that could have some application in the articles. It's now nearly 12:15. We do have 15 minutes for question and answer. I'm sure we can stretch it a bit if there are lots of questions. I see a hand from the Ambassador of the Philippines. Please do also target your question to a specific speaker if you have.
Thank you very much for this very enlightening session. In any dispute, when it's resolved, there will always be victors and losers. For the victor, it would be easy to be magnanimous and to actually be positive about the result of a resolution. But for one who is perceived as a loser, how does one actually manage the outcome of a dispute? So specifically in this case, I'm not saying India was the loser, but if you look at in terms of the resolution, it did not have what it wanted. So how did it and how did India manage the expectations of all the stakeholders relative to the Bay of Bengal dispute? So I leave it to anyone who'd like to answer. Thank you.
Perhaps I could invite Professor Sriradha to respond to the question, and Dr. Rajput, in case you would like to add to it.
I think the point I was trying to make here was the stakes were low. I mean, the actual literal waters that were involved were really something that we could move in. But I think what is more important to India at this point of time was the regional cooperation. The point that was made yesterday very effectively that SAARC does not exist anymore. Literally, it's just a kind of structure in place, but nothing beyond that. So over the years, last few years, we've seen that BIMSTEC and the other several other regional organizations, there has to be a cooperative framework in place. And I think for India here, it was really a very small loss compared to what it would mean in terms of the engagement. And I think India and Bangladesh by then, in 2008, when we started the dialogue all over again, and this came about in 2014, were on a very positive page. So there has been, I don't think it's a concession really, it was really, accepting the award very graciously. But also because, as I said, the benefit of that was far outweighing the negatives of this particular award of, certain kilometers here, really. I think that was the baseline, that India was looking at the larger picture, which is far more important than nitpicking on smaller issue levels.
Thank you very much. It entails a very important philosophical question. What lens we apply to an outcome of a dispute? If you apply a legal test to the outcome of a dispute, then there are no victors or losers. There is a legal argument which was fought out, but we were unsuccessful to convince the neutral arbiter on what we were trying to argue for. But if we apply the political lens, then there is a victor and a loser. The classical case is of India-Pakistan Kishan Ganga arbitration. At the interim stage, India lost, but at the final hearing, India won. This is what the media would report or a layman would analyze. But is it just that? At an interim stage, the considerations were different. The tribunal concluded something based on legal principles. But at the final stage, analyzing the legal arguments, it came to a conclusion which was very different than what it reached at an interim stage. So the beauty of taking out a dispute from the political realm to the legal realm is you get out of the fight of a victor and a loser. Because if we want to coexist, I want to step out a bit and make a general comment. Yes, of course, there are problems with enforcement. How many traffic light violations are punished in India? There are problems. But are you then going to discredit that there is no rule of law in India? What happens in international law is, of course, there are large issues. they have high stakes, and there's far more attention on them. Therefore, even a minor violation gets floated up. A bigger one is bound to attract far more traction. That does not mean law exists. Law does not exist. What is fundamental is, for a rising power like India, and I always say that, and I would like to digress a bit and speak about my experience while campaigning at the United Nations for the membership of ILC. African states, Latin American states would look at me, look at my face, and talk to me as if they're talking to a friend, forget all diplomacy, and say, go home, why are you campaigning? You don't need to campaign, you're India. Why is that? Because India has emphasized on value-based international relations. That is what distinguishes India. And I understand this Bay of Bengal arbitrations represent a value-based international relations system. A system which is rule-based. We might lose. How much we lose is a different aspect. Are we losing mere 20,000 kilometers, maybe more than that? But if we are willing to stand by the rules, if we expect others to comply by the rules, we have to be the first one, because soon the tables might be turned. I think we need to look at these disputes from a legal perspective, which involve a legal act, and analyze them at a more appropriate and a philosophical level.
Very good points. No victors, losers, victory for law. Ambassador Tariq Karimullah.
I'd just like to add to that point, from the point of view of the country which is deemed to have won, the smaller country which was deemed to be the underdog, and how there was a general agreement between the leadership and in both the countries that we had political problems internally. We need to help each other to contextualize whatever we are heading. Bangladesh agreed that we will not grow about it, and India agreed that they will not. And one very important factor was that within India and within Bangladesh, there was a growing opinion, body of opinion saying we need to work with each other. And therefore, whatever we can do to get put behind us helps us to reach out to others with the larger issues.
Thank you. Pragmatic considerations of working together. We have two more questions here. Can I ask Shekhar Sinha first? Shekhar wanted to? Okay, comment on that.
I think just wanted to say, I think this also shows India's respect for UNCLOS, and that's what we were trying to see. And I think in my welcome remarks in the inaugural session, I had said why we planned this particular session. This was to show to the world that how India has always abided by international laws and tried to adhere to. We could have challenged the decision. There was a legal recourse that we could have challenged the decision which was legally perceived to be against India. But we felt that it was in the interest of the bilateral relations that we don't challenge it. And population in both the countries by and large accepts the third party for international law rather than a political solution which would have been actually criticized as a sellout by one party or another. So I think, and that's why we wanted to be a role model for the other countries.
Thank you, Captain Lok. I was going to make that point in my summing up, but Admiral Shekhar Sinha.
I think the chief hydrographer is not here. Probably he would have given you the background, but since I'm aware of this. After the judgment was announced, the chief hydrographer was obviously went and briefed the foreign minister at that time. And it was at the highest level that the decision was taken that yes, if it is as per the law and if it is in the larger interest of a bilateral relation, accept it. That is just one line that was spoken by the foreign minister at that time. And everybody was happy, including Roy. Basically, the minister wanted to understand the technical nuances so that in case there is a question in the parliament, she can stand by this, the acceptance of the judgment of the ICJ. So very much it is in the larger interest, and secondly, sticking to the law.
Any more questions? We still have a little bit of time. Welcome, Professor Sekhar.
Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. And actually my question is related to all presenters. I'm just wondering what is the kind of a merit to make delimitation? Probably as you know, so Japan has not successfully delimited maritime delimitation with its neighboring state. And of course, as a lawyer, I just have the impression that delimitation should be done in accordance with international law. But after 3 years or 5 years have passed after the delimitation in the Bengal Bay. So what kind of merit have you ever held? So that's my question, very broad question.
So could you repeat what kind of?
So what kind of merit or advantage have you gotten from the delimitation?
Now, who would like to go first on this?
Let me try to explain it anecdotally. We have a neighbor who's very noisy. We have two alternatives: going to court and seeking an injunction against him, and second is fine, we'll see till it is bearable. Do you really want, does the state really want to take every dispute and get it resolved? It's wise to resolve all disputes, but if a dispute has not yet transformed into a hotbed, there is unwillingness on the part of states to erect a new dispute. Because if you erect and resurrect a dispute, it is going to have consequences, some win, some lose. So you, as I often say, you don't want to ask the Brexit question, yes or no. You might want it to be confused, and it's fine, as long as it is not resulting into disruption of international relations. Because a perfect utopian world of perfect compliance with everything at the international level and everybody abiding strictly by the rules, unfortunately doesn't exist anywhere. What exists is pragmatism, trying to hedge the disputes, to manage the disputes. If states are able to manage the disputes and not, except for few inflammatory statements here and there during elections, are fine. But if they're not resulting into disruptions of relationship, I think we should be able to survive in that peaceful coexistence.
Anyone else would like to join? Okay, we have a question there from Ambassador Gudmund Eriksson.
Yes, well, I want to say a couple of words on this case. Unfortunately, I had already left the tribunal before that case was brought. I would dearly have loved to have been with my colleagues on that case. And in fact, I'm not completely in agreement with everything they did from the point of view of the law. But two accomplishments, I think, come from the decision, which are not necessarily leading to a dispute settlement amongst neighbors, but certainly gives guidance to other courts, and has done in the past, has done since. Firstly, that you might say that this concept of natural prolongation, which the legal people amongst us know has been diminished. And secondly, I think that the court has given much more stability in the general principles of international law for delimitation. And I think many countries look at that decision and say, well, maybe my case is not that good, I better negotiate. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just sum up now. I don't see any more questions. Basically, I think it's been a very rich session, very informative, very awareness enhancing. I won't sum it up for you. I think you'll all make your own conclusions. I'd just like to underline 2 or 3 points. One is the importance of political will in the entire process, from the process of agreeing to go to the tribunal to honoring its ruling. The second is the importance of pragmatic considerations. The third, I think, is okay, once the ruling has been made, how should the benefits of that be developed, in a sense? I think in the case of the Bay of Bengal, we haven't yet done that. And we do have certain structures, if not in architecture, which could perhaps begin to do that. And certainly India, as the biggest state in the region, has a responsibility to take the initiative of that. And I think that platform that we have is really the BIMSTEC. Now, Sri Radha pointed out that BIMSTEC has been dormant for a little while. Prime Minister Modi has given it a certain fillip. BIMSTEC does not cover all the Bay of Bengal littorals. Perhaps some mechanism could be found to involve them. But clearly, if the rim states and if the littoral states of the Bay of Bengal don't do something about the development, management, conservation, and exploitation of the resources of the Bay of Bengal, other states outside powers will, and we will be very major losers. So a ruling is good insofar as it settles an issue, but then it should be the base, and I think this is also a point that Professor Panda was making. It should be the base for something more, for a roadmap, for a vision, for a plan, and for a certain implementation that actually converts what was once upon a time a dispute into a kind of zone of cooperation, in which all countries, outside countries too, are welcome with their technologies, with their resources, with their funding, financing, and ultimately for the benefit of humankind, which is what in the end the UNCLOS is all about. Thank you once again to all our panelists for some really thought-provoking, stimulating discussions, and also to the questions from the floor. May I once again, in customary fashion, ask you all to give our panelists a warm welcome. Thank you. The session is over.